A night in the woods. Our camp, which was nothing more than a shed of boughs open on the side toward the fire, promised a sufficient protection against the rain, so long as the wind should blow from the right quarter, and an outlying deer stalker might have been content with our means and appliances for comfort during the night. Cheney, indeed, seemed perfectly satisfied as he watched the savory slices which were to form our supper steaming up from the coals. "Well," said the woodsman, "you see there's no place but what if a man bestirs himself to do his best, he may find some comfort in it. Now, many's the time that I have been in the woods on a worse night than this, and having no axe nor nothing to make a fire with, have crept into a hollow log and lay shivering till morning. But here, now, with such a fire as that." As he spoke, a sudden puff of wind drove the smoke from the green and wet timber full into our faces, and filled the shanty to a degree so stifling that we all rushed out into the rain that blew in blinding torrents against us. "Tormented lightning!" cried John, aghast at this new annoyance. "This is too pesky bad. But I can manage that smoke if the wind doesn't blow from more than 3/4 at a time." Seizing his axe upon the instant, he plunged into the darkness beyond the fire, and in a moment or two a large tree came crashing with all its leafy honors, bearing down with it 2 or 3 saplings to our feet. With the green boughs of these he made a wall around the fire to shut out the wind, leaving it open only on the side toward the shanty. The supper was now cooked without further interruption. My friend was too ill to eat, but, though under some anxiety on his account, I myself did full justice to the culinary skill of our guide, and began to find some enjoyment amid all the discomfort of our situation. The recollection of similar scenes in other days gave a relish to the wildness of the present, and inspired that complacent feeling which a man of less active pursuits sometimes realizes when he finds that the sedentary habits of 2 or 3 years have not yet warped and destroyed the stirring tastes of his youth. We told stories and recounted adventures. I could speak of these northern hills, from having passed some time among them upon a western branch of the Hudson, when a lad of 14, while the mountain hunter would listen with interest to the sporting scenes that I could describe to him upon the open plains of the far west. Though I found it impossible to make him understand how men could find their way in a new country where there were so few trees. With regard to the incidents and legends that I gathered in turn from him, I may hereafter enlighten the reader, but our discourse was suddenly cut short by a catastrophe which had nearly proved a very serious one. This was nothing more nor less than the piles of brush which encircled our fire, to keep the wind away, suddenly kindling into a blaze, and for a moment or two threatening to consume our camp. The wind at the same time poured down the gorge in shifting, angry blasts, which whirled the flames in reeling eddies high into the air, bringing the gray cliffs into momentary light, touching the dark evergreens with a ruddy glow, and lighting up the stems of the pale birches that looked like sheeted ghosts amid the surrounding gloom. A finishing touch of the elements was yet wanting to complete the agreeableness of our situation, and finally, just as the curtain of brush on the windward side of the fire was consumed, the cold rain changed into a flurry of snow, and the quickly melted flakes were driven with the smoke into the innermost parts of our wigwam. Conversation was now out of the question. John did, indeed, struggle on with a panther story for a moment or two, and 1 or 2 attempts were made to joke upon our miserable situation, but sleet and smoke alternately damped and stifled every effort, and then all was still except the roar of the elements. My sick friend must have passed a horrible night, as he woke me once or twice with his coughing. But I wrapped myself in my cloak, and placing my mouth upon the ground to avoid choking from the smoke, I was soon dreaming as quietly as if in a curtained chamber at home. The last words I heard John utter as he coiled himself in a blanket were, "Well, it's one comfort, since it's taken on to blow so. I've cut down most of the trees around us that would be likely to fall and crush us during the night." The hills and Mount Marcy. The ringing of Cheney's axe was the first sound that met my ear in the morning, which broke excessively cold. The fire had burnt low, though frequently replenished by him during the night, and he was now engaged in renewing it to cook our breakfast, which was soon ready, and for which the frosty mountain air gave me a keen appetite. The kind fellow, too, prepared some toast and a hot draught for my enterprising companion, whom nothing could prevent from further exploring the pass. With this view, we began descending a precipice in the rear of our camp to a place called the Ice Hole. The trees on the side of this precipice have a secret for growing peculiarly their own, or they could never flourish and maintain their place in such a position. The wall, some 60 or 80 feet high and almost perpendicular, is covered with moss, which peels off in flakes of a yard square as you plant your heels in it in descending. Yet this flimsy substitute for soil supports a straggling growth of evergreens that will bear the weight of a man as he clings to them to avoid being dashed to pieces in the glen below. The snow of the last night, which covered the mountain tops, made the stems of these saplings so slippery and cold that our hands became numb in grasping them before we were halfway down the descent. The river runs through the bottom of this ravine, but its passage is so cavernous that it is only by letting yourself down into the fissures between the immense boulders, which are here wedged together in indescribable confusion, and crawling beneath the rocks, that you can obtain a sight of its current. From this chasm you view the sky as from the bottom of a well. A pair of eagles that have their nest in the cliff above showed like swallows as they hovered along its face. The sun never penetrates into this gloomy labyrinth, and here, unless the waters are unusually high, you may find cakes of ice at midsummer. Emerging from this wild chaos of rocks, we clambered a short distance up the sides of the glen and penetrated a few hundred yards further into the pass to a sloping platform amidst the rocks, where the finest view of the whole scene is to be obtained. And here, within a few yards of its first well springs, you behold one of the strongest features of the mighty Hudson developed even in its birth. It has already cloven its way through a defile as difficult as that through which it rushes near West Point, and far more stupendous. A rocky precipice of 1,200 feet rises immediately in front of you, and the jaws of the pass open barely wide enough to admit the egress of the stream at its highest stages of water. The cliff opposite looks raw and recent, as if riven through but yesterday, and ponderous blocks of stone that would almost make mountains themselves, wrenched from their former seat, in what is now the center of the pass, stand edgewise leaning down the glen as if waiting some new throw of this convulsion of nature to sweep them further on their terrific career. Many of these features of the place you have already seen while climbing to the point where we stand. But now, upon turning round as you gain the head of the pass and look out from its bosom upon the mountain region below, a view of unequaled beauty and grandeur greets the eye. The morning sun, which will not for hours yet reach the place where you stand, is shining upon airy peaks and wooded hills which shoulder each other as far as the eye can reach, while far down the glen, where the maple and beech find a more genial soil to nourish them, the rainbow hues of autumn are glistening along the stream, which within a few miles of its fountainhead has already expanded into a beautiful lake. The group of wild hills among which the Hudson rises stand wholly detached from any other chain in North America. The highest peak of the Aganustian Range, or the Black Mountains, as some call them, from the dark aspect which their somber cedars, arid, frowning cliffs give them at a distance, was measured during last summer and found to be nearly 6,000 feet in height. Mount Marcy, as it has been christened, not improperly after the public functionary who first suggested the survey of this interesting region, presents a perfect pyramidal top when viewed from Lake Sanford. Its alpine climate is very different from that prevailing in the valleys below, and I observed its cone sheathed in snow one day when I found the water temperate enough to enjoy swimming in the lake. The effect was equally beautiful and sublime. The frost had here and there flecked the forest with orange and vermilion, touching a single sumac or a clump of maples at long intervals. But generally the woods displayed as yet but few autumnal tints, and the deep verdure of the adjacent mountains set off the snowy peak in such high contrast, soaring as it did far above them, and seeming to pierce, as it were, the blue sky which curtained them, that the poetic Indian epithet of Ta-ha-was, he splits the sky, was hardly too extravagant to characterize its peculiar grandeur. The ascent of Mount Marcy and the view from the summit will hereafter puzzle many an abler pen than mine in the attempt to describe them. The wild falls of Broken Water, the bright pools of what is called a Place of Pebbles, and the tall cascade of the Hanging Spear will hereafter tempt many to strike over to the eastern branch of the Hudson and follow it up to Lake Golden, while the echoing glen referred to as a raised voice, though now as savage as the Indian Pass already described, will reverberate with more musical cries than the howl of the wolf or the panther, whose voices only are now raised to awaken its echoes. At present, however, the mountain is a desert. Wolverines, lynxes, and wildcats, with a few ravens, who generally follow in the track of beasts of prey, are almost the only living things that have their habitations in these high solitudes, and save when their occasional cry breaks the stillness, the solemn woods are on a calm day as silent as the grave. The absence of game birds and of the beasts of chase which give his subsistence to the hunter prevents him from wasting his toil in climbing to the loftiest pinnacles, and so far as I learned, it is only lately that curiosity has prompted those who have passed a great part of their lives in the neighborhood to make the ascent. The view, however, when once realized, seems to strike them not less than it does more cultivated minds. "It makes a man feel," said a hunter to me, "what it is to have all creation placed beneath his feet. There are woods there over which it would take a lifetime to hunt, mountains that seem shouldering each other up and away, heaven knows where. Thousands of little lakes are let in among them. Old Champlain, though 50 miles off, glistens below you like a strip of white birch bark, and the green mountains of Vermont beyond it fade and fade away, till they disappear as gradually as a cold scent when the dew rises.